Hi, this is Satyan Bhartia and welcome to TFI Insights. And today we have with us Tim Hinrichs, co-founder and CTO of Styra. Tim, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Swap.
Tim, tell us a bit about Styra. Since you co-founded the company, I want to understand what problem you saw in the market that you wanted to solve that you started it.
So yeah, when we started Styra, the problem that we saw was there were organizations all over the world that were embracing cloud and cloud native technology. And what we saw is that as they did that, as they embraced all those new technologies, those new processes, those new architectures for building applications, that they would need a new way of addressing authorization, a unified way of addressing authorization, where, remember, authorization is a problem of which people or which machines can execute which actions within software. So that was the problem we set out to solve, to provide a unified solution to authorization across all of the different cloud native software systems.
Now, if you look at different cloud native software system, if you also look at different clouds, we live in a multi-cloud world. You may run some workload in XYZ public cloud. At the same time, you may choose to run something on-prem as well. Like AWS, they have their own, I think, identity management, IAM solutions. Google may have their own, Microsoft, and they don't kind of talk to each other. So a good analogy is, we all have passports, right? It doesn't matter which country we go to, we just show our passport, their systems read it, and we can do. So talk a bit about, when you talk about this, how do you make it easier for people to run whatever workload they want on whatever cloud they want without having to worry about this kind of I don't know what is the right word there, so that it just works across different clouds.
One thing I'll separate out here is, multi-cloud makes a ton of sense the way you described it. We're also looking at unifying different kinds of software. So not necessarily the cloud, but maybe looking at a container management system like Kubernetes, even unifying that with the applications that are maybe containerized that are running on top of Kubernetes. And so our basic vision for what will happen is that you will have one framework, one unified way, one language for expressing policies, regardless whether they're about, let's say, Kubernetes resources or they're about microservice APIs. So you have one framework for doing that. And because of that, now you can take those policies and apply them to different kinds of technology, regardless what kind of technology that is. And then more than that, you've got security and compliance teams that have one place to go and analyze and audit those policies as well.
And how many of these policies follow either open standard or a lot of open source technologies?
Well, so one of the things that we've done is created the Open Policy Agent project. It is open source. We created that after we founded the company and then donated it to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So that open source project is what all of these policies that we're talking about are written in. It provides a language, policy engine for making decisions using that language, and a bunch of tooling around that. And so in that sense, for sure, all of the policies that you would write in that open source projects language.
So what are some of the challenges that companies, organizations, or users do face when they move from one piece of technology to other piece? And how OPA kind of solves that? So
what I think a lot of users of OPA and Styra's software do is they see maybe one fairly concrete problem. Let's take Kubernetes authorization, or more technically Kubernetes admission control. And what they end up doing is saying, well, today I need to put guardrails in place to ensure that when a developer tries to create new resources and run new applications on top of Kubernetes, that in fact, they do so in a safe way, safe in terms of security, compliance, and operations. And so that's one very concrete, one very popular use case of Open Policy Agent, to be able to put those guardrails in place for Kubernetes. And what we see users do is they go ahead and they successfully roll out OPA to solve that very concrete pain point. But then they realize that same technology can be applied to do microservice authorization, for example, or one of a dozen other simple use cases. And when they go then to microservices, they've already learned all of the tools, all of the language, all of the how to operationalize and deploy OPA and policy as code more generally to solve that second authorization use case. And so that's what we typically see users and customers do.
Now, you contributed the project to CNCF, but how are you leveraging that project? Because when you look at open source, it could be like a day one problem. You can bring in the project, but then management of the project, maintenance of the project, and adding a lot of features to the project. So how do you kind of, if I can use the word, commercialize this agent? Can you talk about that?
One of the things that we knew when we set out to solve this unified authorization problem was that we needed two components. We needed two different pieces of software, one of which became the Open Policy Agent project. The way to think about OPA is that it is a policy engine that runs on the same server as whatever software needs authorization decisions. The motivation for that being that we need to guarantee high availability and high performance so that software system that needs decisions gets them very, very quickly. So that was one piece we need. But now what happens is you end up, if you're applying OPA to, let's say, microservices or to Kubernetes or to one of the other many use cases for OPA, you end up having not one, but 10, 100, 1,000 different instances of OPA. So what you need is a control plane, a management plane, a single pane of glass to help write policy, distribute policy, and so on. So that's the commercial offering that we have. We offer a commercial control plane for Open Policy Agent called Styra's Declarative Authorization Service.
Can you tell us a bit more about the DAS or Declarative Authorization Service a bit?
So the Styra's Declarative Authorization Service is a general purpose OPA control plane. So any sort of OPA use case that you might want to be using, you can use Styra's Declarative Authorization Service to manage all of those OPAs. We focus on a couple of things with the DAS, the first of which is policy authoring. Each use case may be a little bit different, but for Kubernetes, for example, we provide a pre-built list of over 70 rules that we know are embody best practices for all kinds of OPA users. That same pre-built list of rules also embodies things like the pod security policies that really come from wanting to put tight guardrails around what permissions a container can use when it's running on Kubernetes. So policy authoring is one thing. We also focus quite a bit on debugging. One feature that a lot of people seem to like is called impact analysis. The idea being there that we give you feedback about how many of your past decisions are going to change if you release a new update to a policy before you put it into production.
Does it also allow, once you set up a policy, to replicate or deploy it across whatever, wherever you're running workload? Or do you have to do the same work again and again? And how do you keep it updated? When you update it, you make sure that it's updated everywhere.
That was the next feature, which is that policy distribution is really important. When you get to running tens, hundreds of OPAs, making sure that the right policy gets to the right OPA at the right time is pretty important. And that is certainly something we do with Styra's commercial offering.
What are some of the use cases that you are interested in when we talk about DAS?
So the first thing that we released was special support for Kubernetes. A number of these use cases become so popular that we add special support for them. Kubernetes was one, and that was the first one we looked at, is putting authorization in place for Kube. The second one that we just announced this week is support for microservice authorization. The idea there being that ensuring that users can put policies in place to protect which APIs get executed and when and by whom.
I mean, this is pretty obvious, Kubernetes use case. But was there any specific reason that you focused on Kubernetes to start with?
Yeah, it was just very popular. It was one part of the reason that so many people are using Kubernetes or OPA for Kubernetes authorization today that it was very clear that would be quite valuable to add special support for in Styra's DAS. It's run in certainly Google and Microsoft's cloud. And then the other thing was that it was just a very good technical fit for what OPA can provide.
And so what are the other, as the DAS is evolving, what are the other use cases you will continue to add or, you are interested in? Hey, this is our next target.
Well, the one we just released there was microservices. That one is really exciting to us. Because we know it'll help a whole bunch of people who are building applications in this new microservice architecture. The other reason we get excited by it is because now that we have support for both Kubernetes and microservices, what we now have is a unified authorization framework that covers both the platform as well as the applications that are running on that platform. And so to us, this is just a very natural next step in delivering that vision of unified authorization across cloud native.
Well, if you look at OPA, it has its own release cadence. It's managed by the community. The community decide what. What about Styra DAS? What does it release cycle look like? What does your roadmap look like?
The nice thing here is that Styra's Declarative Authorization Service is available both as a SaaS offering where we actually run it for you. It's also available on-prem in case you need that. And so you can pick whichever one you like. In terms of how often we update the SaaS, at least every week, but sometimes more often than that. And the on-prem comes out less frequently, roughly on the order of every month. And then in terms of the roadmap, what we do is we love talking with the OPA community and understanding what their needs are. And then the ones that are most pressing just make their way into the Styra's DAS product.
So who would you see as the ideal target audience for DAS, or who should be using it?
Well, I think really any organization that's embracing cloud native and that has started down the path of using Open Policy Agent as well, those are great candidates, especially those people who are maybe a Kubernetes administrator, or they're concerned or they're responsible for the safeguarding of that cluster, and that could be security, compliance, or operations. Or the developers who are running applications on top of Kubernetes. Those are all great candidates for folks that could use the Styra's Declarative Authorization Service.
Awesome, Tim. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, even if remotely, and kind of explaining OPA as well as DAS. And I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Swap.